The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the city as I stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner for my husband, Ethan. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of his cologne that lingered in the house. It had been 3 years since we tied the knot, and every day with him felt like a dream. Ethan was everything I had ever wanted: charming, intelligent, and successful. He was the kind of man who could make you feel like the only woman in the room, even in a crowded space. But lately, something had shifted. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I poured myself a glass of wine, the deep red liquid swirling in the glass as I leaned against the counter. My thoughts drifted to my mother, Sophia. She was a woman who had lived a life full of experiences, yet she still carried herself with an air of allure that could captivate anyone. Ethan had always been polite to her, but recently, his attention toward her had become different. It was subtle at first, lingering glances, casual touches that lasted a moment too long. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew something was off. The sound of the front door opening pulled me from my thoughts. Ethan walked in, his tailored suit hugging his broad shoulders perfectly. He looked every bit the successful businessman he was, and my heart skipped a beat as he approached me. "Hey, beautiful," he said, his voice smooth as silk. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that sent shivers down my spine. "Dinner smells amazing," I smiled, trying to push aside the unease that had been gnawing at me. "It's almost ready. How was your day?" "Busy as usual," he replied, loosening his tie. "But seeing you makes it all worth it." We sat down to eat, the conversation flowing easily between us. But as the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ethan's phone buzzed repeatedly, and each time, he glanced at it with a look I couldn't quite decipher. Finally, he excused himself, saying he needed to take a call. I watched him disappear into the study, his voice low and muffled through the door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself standing outside the study, my ear pressed against the wood. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone of his voice was soft, almost intimate. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing.
Who was he talking to?
And why did it feel like he was hiding something from me? The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. Ethan had left early for work, leaving a note on the nightstand. "Had an early meeting. Love you," it read. I sighed, feeling a pang of disappointment. I had hoped we could spend the morning together, but it seemed like work always came first. As I got ready for the day, my mind kept drifting back to the phone call from the night before. I decided to pay my mother a visit, hoping that spending time with her would help clear my head. Sophia lived in a quaint little house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by lush greenery. It was a place that always brought me a sense of peace. When I arrived, she greeted me with a warm hug, her familiar scent of jasmine and vanilla enveloping me. "What a pleasant surprise," she said, her eyes sparkling with delight. "What brings you here?" "I just wanted to see you," I replied, forcing a smile. "It's been a while." We sat in the garden, sipping tea and chatting about everything and nothing. But as the conversation turned to Ethan, I noticed a change in her demeanor. Her eyes seemed to light up at the mention of his name, and there was a softness in her voice that I hadn't heard before. It was subtle, but it was there. "Ethan's such a wonderful man," she said, her gaze distant. "You're lucky to have him." I nodded, but the unease in my chest grew heavier. "Yeah, he's amazing." The rest of the visit passed in a blur, and by the time I left, I felt more confused than ever. As I drove home, my mind raced with questions. Was I just being paranoid? Or was there something more going on between Ethan and my mother? That evening, I decided to confront Ethan. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. When he came home, I was waiting for him in the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I heard you on the phone last night."
Who are you talking to?
For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. It was your mother, he admitted, his voice calm. We've been spending time together. My heart stopped. What do you mean? Spending time together? He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and something else I couldn't quite place. I love you, Lily, but you've never been the one I wanted the most. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the room spin around me. What are you saying? He stepped closer, his voice low and steady. Sophia and we've been together for a while now. It's complicated, but I can't deny what I feel for her. Tears welled up in my eyes as the reality of his words sank in. How could you do this to me? To us? He reached out to touch me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. Don't, I whispered, my voice breaking. Just don't. I turned and ran out of the house, the tears streaming down my face. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind raced with thoughts of betrayal and heartbreak. But little did I know, the truth was far more twisted than I could have ever imagined. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white as I sped down the empty streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, anger, disbelief. How could Ethan do this to me? How could my own mother betray me like this? I pulled into a deserted parking lot, turning off the engine and resting my forehead against the cool leather of the steering wheel. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat a reminder of the pain that had lodged itself deep in my chest. I needed answers. I needed to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Digging through my bag, I pulled out my phone and hesitated. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through my contacts, hovering over my mother's name. I didn't know what I would say to her, but I couldn't just ignore this. I deserved the truth. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pressed call. It rang once,
Twice.
3 times. Then, finally, she answered. Lily. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Is everything okay? A bitter laugh escaped my lips. You tell me, Mother. Is everything okay? Because I just found out that my husband has been having an affair with you. So no, I don't think everything is okay. There was silence on the other end.
Then a sigh.
Lily, please. Don't. My voice was sharp, cutting through the night air like a blade. Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on? Were you ever going to tell me, or were you just going to keep pretending like nothing was wrong? Another long pause. Then, finally,
She spoke.
It started a year ago. I felt like the air had been sucked from my lungs.
A year?
My voice cracked. You've been sneaking around behind my back for an entire year? It wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered. But things between Ethan and I. Don't, I snapped. Don't try to justify this. I don't care how it happened. I just want to know why. She hesitated. Because I love him. The words shattered me. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill down my cheeks. You love him? He's my husband. Do you even hear yourself? I never meant to hurt you, Lily, she said softly. But the truth is, Ethan and I have a history. Long before you ever met him. A chill ran down my spine. What are you talking about? She exhaled shakily. Ethan and I were together before. Years ago. Before you ever knew him. Before he met you. My mind reeled. That doesn't make any sense. He never mentioned. Because we kept it a secret, she cut in. We had an affair back then, too. But I ended it when I realized it could never be anything more than that. And then, a few years later, you brought him home as your boyfriend. I tried to stay away. I really did. But he never stopped looking at me that way. And her voice broke. I was weak. My entire body went numb. So what? You thought it would be fun to rekindle an old flame behind my back. It wasn't like that, she insisted. I tried to resist. But the more time we spent together, the more I realized that he was never meant to be yours, Lily. He was always meant to be mine. I felt like I was going to be sick. My own mother. The woman who had raised me. The woman I had trusted more than anyone else. And Ethan?
No.
He had been lying to me from the very beginning. He had never really loved me. I was just a placeholder. A distraction. I ended the call without another word, my hands trembling as I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I tried to process what I had just heard. A sudden knock on my window made me jump. I turned my head, my pulse hammering in my ears. Ethan stood outside my car, his expression unreadable.
How had he found me?
Reluctantly, I rolled down the window, my voice shaking with barely restrained fury. "What do you want?" "Lily, please," he said. "Let me explain." "Explain?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You mean lie to me some more? I'm done listening to your bullshit, Ethan. I know everything."
His jaw tightened.
"Then you know that I never wanted to hurt you." "Oh, spare me the theatrics," I snapped. "You never wanted to hurt me, but you slept with my mother behind my back for an entire year? And you expect me to believe that?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking almost frustrated. "I didn't plan for this to happen, Lily. It just did."
Right.
"Just like you didn't plan to fall for her years ago? You lied to me."
Ethan.
"Our entire marriage has been a lie." He exhaled sharply. "I did love you. Maybe not in the way you wanted, but I did." Something inside me snapped. "Maybe not in the way I wanted?" My voice was laced with venom. "You married me knowing you were still in love with my mother. You built a life with me, knowing that you were never truly mine. Do you have any idea how cruel that is?" He looked at me, something flickering in his gaze. "I never meant for you to find out like this." "But you did mean for me to find out, didn't you?" I realized suddenly. That's why you weren't careful. That's why you kept sneaking off to take her calls. Why you didn't even bother hiding the way you looked at her. A part of you wanted me to know. He didn't deny it. And that silence was all the confirmation I needed. I felt the final piece of my heart shatter. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. But I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't break in front of him.
Not now.
Not ever. I took a deep breath and looked him dead in the eye. "I want a divorce." For the first time, Ethan's expression shifted. Something like panic flashed across his face. "Lily, wait."
No.
There's nothing left to say. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." And with that, I drove away, leaving him standing there in the cold, empty night. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. I had no idea how long I had been driving. The night had already fallen, swallowing the city in a thick, suffocating fog. My heart was still pounding, as if it wanted to break free from my chest. My breathing was ragged, my tears had dried, but inside, I was still a mess of emotions I couldn't name. Ethan and my mother. Those words kept repeating in my head like an unbreakable curse. I had thought I had the perfect marriage, that Ethan was the best man in the world. But he had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, with the very woman who gave birth to me. I pulled over in front of a small bar, the red neon lights reflecting off my car windows. Without much thought, I stepped inside. The thick scent of liquor and cigarette smoke hit me immediately. But I didn't care. I just needed somewhere to escape, somewhere to find a moment of peace amidst the chaos. I took a seat at the bar and ordered a whiskey. The amber liquid swirled in my glass, reminding me of Ethan's eyes, warm, but filled with lies. I took a sip, letting the sharp burns scorch my throat, welcoming the temporary numbness. "A beautiful woman like you drinking alone? That's a shame." I turned to the man sitting beside me. He had a charming smile and sharp eyes that studied me with interest. "I'm not in the mood to flirt," I muttered, exhausted. He shrugged, sipping his beer. "Who said I was flirting? Just curious. People come here to forget something. What about you?" I stared at my drink for a moment before letting out a bitter laugh. "I'm trying to forget the fact that my husband is sleeping with my mother." The man stilled for a brief second, but quickly regained his composure. "That's rough. But at least you know the truth." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He set his beer down and turned slightly toward me. "Sometimes, what we know isn't the whole story. Are you sure you've seen the full picture? His words sent a chill down my spine. What did I really know? Ethan admitted to having an affair with my mother, but I never asked him when it started, why it happened, or what really went on between them. A sudden fear crept up my spine. If Ethan had hidden this from me all this time, what else was he keeping from me? I downed the rest of my whiskey, feeling the alcohol begin to take effect. I need answers, I murmured. The man beside me shrugged. Then go find them. When I arrived home, Ethan was sitting in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his expression tense as if he had been waiting for me. The moment he saw me, he stood up immediately. Lily, where have you been? I called you dozens of times. I crossed my arms, meeting his gaze. We need to talk. He exhaled, setting his drink down. I know you're angry. I can't change what happened, but at least let me explain. I felt my entire body stiffen. Then talk, Ethan. Explain to me why my husband is having an affair with my mother. He was silent for a long moment before finally looking up at me. Because I had no other choice. I frowned. What? Ethan took a deep breath, something dark flickering in his eyes, an emotion I had never seen before. Lily, I don't love your mother. I never did. But there are secrets that if you knew, you wouldn't be able to go back to the life you had before. My stomach twisted. What are you talking about? Ethan stepped closer, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away instantly. His jaw tightened before he spoke again, his voice a whisper. Have you ever wondered why your father left you and your mother? I froze. My father, a ghost in my memories. He left when I was too young to remember, and my mother never told me why. I never asked because I thought I didn't need to know. He left because your mother betrayed him, Ethan continued, his tone laced with bitterness. Not with another man, but with his own family. A sharp pain shot through my chest. What the hell are you saying? Ethan's eyes bore into mine, as if he was trying to reach into my soul. Your father didn't just leave. He was forced out. Because if he hadn't left, he would have been killed. I shook my head, dizziness washing over me. No, that's not possible. Ethan took another step closer, his voice dropping even lower. Your mother isn't who you think she is, Lily. She's not just a woman who was betrayed. She's the betrayer. And she dragged me into this mess, too. I stared at Ethan, my breath coming in shallow gasps. What are you saying? He grabbed my shoulders, his eyes dark and unwavering. She doesn't love me, Lily. She's using me to control you. A cold wave of realization crashed over me. Ethan's words sliced through the fragile walls I had built around myself. I wanted to scream, to deny it all. But deep down, I knew there was something more to this story, something lurking in the shadows. And I needed to find the truth. I stood frozen in place. Ethan's words echoing in my mind like a cruel whisper that refused to fade. She's using me to control you. The air in the room felt suffocating, thick with secrets and unspoken truths. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but at the same time, I wasn't sure if I could handle them. My mother, the woman I had trusted, the woman who had raised me. What was she hiding? And why was Ethan involved? I took a shaky step back, shaking my head. No, you're lying. Ethan's jaw clenched. I wish I was. I didn't want to hear any more. My heart was already torn apart. My reality shattered. If I stayed, if I listened, I feared I wouldn't be able to piece myself back together. I turned on my heels and rushed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind me. My chest heaved as I leaned against the wood, struggling to breathe. I needed answers. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed my mother's number. It rang twice before she picked up. Lily. Her voice was calm, too calm. I swallowed hard. I know about you and Ethan. There was a beat of silence, then a quiet sigh. I see. That was it.
No denial, no excuses.
Just those two words. I gritted my teeth. Why, Mom? Why him? Why did you have to destroy my marriage? She let out a soft laugh, one that sent a shiver down my spine. Oh, sweetheart. You really don't know anything, do you? My fingers tightened around the phone. Then tell me. She paused for a moment before speaking again, her tone devoid of emotion. Come see me. We'll talk face to face. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to see her. I wasn't sure if I could handle looking into the eyes of the woman who had betrayed me. But I had no choice. I needed to know the truth. 30 minutes later, I stood in front of my mother's house, my heart pounding against my ribcage. The lights inside were dim, casting eerie shadows across the windows. I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. She was waiting for me in the living room, seated gracefully on the leather couch, a glass of wine in her hand. Her eyes flickered to me, a small smile playing on her lips. You look like a mess, Lily. I clenched my fists. Just tell me why. She took a slow sip of her wine before setting the glass down. You think Ethan betrayed you? That he's the villain in this story? She tilted her head. Poor girl, you have no idea how deep this goes. My breath hitched. Then explain. She sighed, leaning back against the couch. Your father wasn't the man you thought he was. He was a monster, Lily. A man who destroyed lives without remorse. I frowned. What are you talking about? She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. He had secrets, terrible ones. And when I found out, I had two choices: stay silent and let him continue, or make him disappear. A chill ran down my spine. Disappear? She smiled. You were too young to remember, but one night, your father left and never came back. That wasn't an accident. My stomach churned. Are you saying you? She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. I had to protect you, Lily. You and myself. But there was a price to pay. I took a shaky step back. What does this have to do with Ethan? Her smile widened. Ethan was never supposed to be yours. He was mine from the very beginning. I shook my head. No, you're lying. She chuckled. Oh, sweetheart, you really are naive. The walls felt like they were closing in around me. My mother had orchestrated everything. She had taken Ethan, manipulated him, used him against me.
But why?
I sucked in a breath. Did you ever love me? Or was I just another pawn in your game? She tilted her head, considering my words.
Love.
She smiled faintly. Love is an illusion, Lily. A weakness. I did what I had to do to survive. A cold wave of realization washed over me. My mother wasn't just a woman who had an affair with my husband. She was something far worse. And I needed to get away from her before I became her next victim.
Part 5.
I stumbled back, my mother's words swirling in my head like a toxic cloud, suffocating me. Ethan was never supposed to be mine. He was hers. The truth was an open wound, festering and raw. You're insane, I whispered, my voice barely audible. She smiled, tilting her head.
No, sweetheart.
I just know how to play the game. A shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just about an affair. This was something far deeper, something far more twisted. My mother had orchestrated this entire nightmare. She had taken Ethan from me, manipulated him, and now she was sitting there, sipping wine like it was just another evening. I needed to leave. Turning on my heels, I bolted for the door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the handle. But before I could escape, her voice stopped me. Running away, Lily, she mused. Just like your father? I froze. Slowly, I turned back to face her. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. You keep bringing him up. What are you trying to say? She sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. You think I'm the villain here, don't you? Her gaze darkened. But what if I told you your father deserved everything that happened to him? That he wasn't the man you thought he was? My throat tightened. I don't care. None of that excuses what you've done. She laughed softly. Oh, but it explains it. I clenched my fists. You stole my husband. She leaned back, smirking. And he let me. Tears burned at the edges of my vision, but I refused to let them fall. I couldn't break.
Not now.
I hope it was worth it, I spat. Because you've lost me. Her smirk didn't falter. Oh, Lily. You were never really mine to lose. Her words sliced through me like a blade, but I forced myself to turn away. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I yanked the door open and stepped out into the night, the cold air biting against my skin. My mind was a whirlwind of chaos, but one thing was clear: I needed to get far away from her. From Ethan. From everything. I drove without thinking, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mother's voice echoed in my head, over and over again. Ethan was never supposed to be yours. I slammed my foot on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop at the side of the road. My breath came in ragged gasps as I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel. I had to confront him. I had to know the truth. With renewed determination, I turned the car around and headed back to the house I had once called home. When I arrived, the lights were still on. Ethan was waiting. I stormed inside, slamming the door behind me. He was standing in the living room, as if he had been expecting me. His expression was unreadable. "Lily." I marched toward him, my hands trembling. "Tell me it's not true." He didn't answer. "Tell me," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Tell me she forced you. Tell me you didn't." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that simple." My stomach twisted. "Then make it simple." He hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. "I didn't love her, Lily. I never did. But she had power over me." I let out a shaky laugh, one filled with bitterness. "Power." He nodded, his jaw clenching.
She knew things.
Things about my family, about my past. She used it against me. I shook my head. "That doesn't explain why you slept with her." He looked away. I was weak. The words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had been clinging to the hope that there was an explanation, some twisted logic that would make this betrayal easier to bear. But there wasn't. Ethan had chosen her. No matter the reason, no matter the manipulation, he had still made that choice. And I couldn't forgive him for it. I took a deep breath, my heart breaking all over again. "We're done." Ethan's eyes widened. "Lily, wait." But I didn't wait. I turned and walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of what we once were. The night air was cool against my tear-streaked face as I stepped outside. My chest felt hollow, empty. But for the first time in a long time, I also felt free. Free from my mother's games. Free from Ethan's lies. Free to start over. As I drove away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because the past was finally behind me.